Hey friends, welcome back to Unpolished Called. It feels a little tender saying that today. The last little while has been quieter than usual around here, and if you noticed, thank you for noticing. If you didn't, honestly, that's okay too. Life keeps moving, and sometimes we slip out of the rhythm for a minute. I had a bit of a health scare recently. Nothing dramatic to unpack here, and no real details needed. If you follow me on Facebook, there's some stuff posted on there about what happened. I think I mentioned it on my other podcast briefly a couple weeks ago. Just real briefly on one of my shorter episodes for the Bible study. But it was just one of those moments that presses pause whether you're ready or not. The kind that reminds you how thin the line is between rushing through your days and actually living them. So I stepped back. I rested. I listened more than I talked, and I let God meet me in the stillness instead of trying to talk over Him with productivity. Coming back today feels less like picking up where I left off and more like starting from a softer place, a quieter place, not a restart because nothing was broken, but a reset because sometimes our souls just need room to breathe again. So today's conversation is about that space. It's about what it looks like to move forward when you've been reminded how fragile and precious life actually is. About learning in the middle of ordinary days to choose love again. Not because everything is perfect, not because you suddenly figured life out, but because love is still the most faithful way forward. So let's settle in. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves as turning points. They don't arrive with dramatic music or a clear before and after line you can point to later. They just slip quietly into your timeline and rearrange the furniture of your heart without asking permission. You don't always notice it right away. Sometimes you only realize something shifted when you try to go back to the way things felt before and discover I can't quite get there. A health scare has a way of doing that. It interrupts the illusion of endless tomorrows. It makes you aware of your own humanity in a way that's hard to ignore. Suddenly, the future isn't a guarantee you casually assume. It becomes a gift you hold a little more carefully. What surprised me most wasn't fear. Fear came and went like weather, but it wasn't the headline. The deeper thing was clarity, the kind that strips life down to its simplest questions. What actually matters? What do I want to carry forward? What can I finally set down? Clarity doesn't always arrive as a loud revelation. Sometimes it feels like a quiet knowing that settles in your chest. You start noticing the small things you used to rush past, the way light falls across the kitchen in the morning, the sound of someone you love laughing in the next room, the ordinary, unremarkable moments that when you step back are the very substance of life. In that stillness, I kept coming back to one word: love. Not the sentimental kind we toss around casually, the deeper, steadier kind. The choice to move toward instead of away. The willingness to stay open, even when life reminds you how vulnerable that makes you. Choosing love again sounds simple on the surface, but it's rarely effortless. It requires letting go of the instinct to protect yourself by becoming smaller, quieter, more guarded. It asks you to resist the temptation to live half-heartedly just because you've been reminded how easily things can change. There's a strange pull after a scare to shrink your world down to what feels safe, to hold your breath a little, to avoid risks, emotional or otherwise. It's a natural reflex, but it's also a subtle form of forgetting that life was never meant to be lived from behind a shield. Love pulls in the opposite direction. It nudges you back towards presence, towards engagement, towards the courage to participate fully in the days you've been given instead of tiptoeing through them. And that doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means acknowledging reality and still choosing to lean into what's good. Still choosing connection over isolation. Choosing to believe that the world, despite its fragility, is worth showing up for. One of the quiet gifts of slowing down is that you start to see how often love shows up in unremarkable forms. It's not always grand gestures or sweeping moments. More often, it looks like patience, listening, like the decision to speak gently when it would be easier to be sharp, like giving yourself permission to rest instead of proving your worth through constant emotion. We tend to think of love as something we feel, but most days it's something we practice. Posture, direction, a series of small choices that, over time, shape the atmosphere of our lives. When you've brushed up against your own limitations, those choices start to feel less theoretical. They become more urgent in the best way. You realize time isn't something to hoard or waste. It's something to inhabit. There's also a humility that sneaks in. A reminder that we are not as in control as we sometimes pretend to be. And oddly, that realization can be freeing. When you stop trying to orchestrate every outcome, you can start paying attention to what's actually in front of you. The conversation happening right now, the person sitting across from you, the quiet invitation to be present instead of planning your next move. Choosing love, again, isn't about reinventing yourself. It's about returning to what's most true. It's remembering that the measure of a life isn't how much you accomplish or how impressive your story sounds when summarized. It's how you show up in the ordinary spaces where no one is keeping score. In those spaces, love looks like consistency, forgiveness. It looks like giving people room to be human, including yourself. It looks like choosing hope, not as naive optimism, but as a deliberate act of trust. There's something deeply grounding about realizing you don't need a dramatic new plan. You just need a willing heart, a willingness to keep showing up, extending grace, keep believing that even small acts of kindness ripple outward in ways you may never fully see. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of moments that shake you awake. They don't just remind you of what you could lose. They remind you of what you still have. They sharpen your awareness of the goodness that was there all along, waiting for you to notice. So choosing love, again, becomes less about a grand declaration and more about a daily orientation, a gentle turning of the heart towards what matters most, a refusal to let fear write the script for the rest of your story. Moving forward after a pause doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels tentative, like stepping onto a path you know well, but seeing it with new eyes. There's a softness in that first step, a heightened awareness of each moment, as if the volume of life has been turned down just enough for you to hear the quieter notes you used to miss. One of the questions that tend to surface in seasons like this is how to carry what you've learned without letting the experience define you entirely. There's a balance between honoring the impact and refusing to let it become the only lens through which you see your life. Choosing love again becomes the bridge between those two realities. It lets you acknowledge what happened without getting stuck there. It keeps you oriented towards the future without dismissing the past. Love has a way of widening your perspective. It reminds you that life is not just a collection of milestones and crises. It's an unfolding story filled with ordinary days that matter just as much as the dramatic ones. When you choose love, you're choosing to stay engaged with that unfolding instead of retreating into caution. There's also renewed awareness of time, not in a frantic race against the clock way, but in a reverent way. You start noticing how quickly moments pass and how easy it is to miss them if you're distracted by everything that feels urgent but isn't truly important. Love helps you sift through that noise. It clarifies what deserves your attention. Relationships rise to the surface. Meaningful work, moments of rest, the small rituals that make a day feel grounded and whole. It's interesting how often we postpone love. We tell ourselves we'll be more present later, more patient, more generous once life calms down. But life rarely calms down on its own. There's always another task, deadline, another reason to wait. A pause forces you to confront that tendency. It shows you that the only time you ever really have is now. And in that realization, love stops being something you plan to get around to and becomes something you choose intentionally in the middle of whatever is happening. And there's courage in that choice. Not the loud, heroic kind, the steady kind. The courage to remain open even when you know how fragile everything is. The courage to invest emotionally even when there are no guarantees. The courage to live fully instead of cautiously observing your own life from a distance. Love also reshapes how you see yourself. Instead of measuring your worth by productivity or achievement, you start to see it in the way you care for others, in the way you respond to challenges, in the way you allow yourself to be human without constant self criticism. Grace becomes less of an abstract idea and more of a daily practice. You extend it outward, but you also learn to receive it. You recognize that being gentle with yourself isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's an acknowledgement that you are not a machine built for endless output, but a person meant to live with depth and intention. As you step back into your routines, you may notice they feel different, the same tasks, the same responsibilities, but a slightly different energy behind them. Less urgency to prove something, more desire to be present, more appreciation for the simple fact that you get to do them at all. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. It transforms ordinary days from something to endure into something to inhabit. It makes space for gratitude to grow, not as a forced exercise, but as a natural response to awareness. Choosing love again doesn't mean you won't have hard days. It doesn't insulate you from stress or uncertainty. What it does is give you a compass, a way to orient yourself when emotions run high or circumstances feel overwhelming. You can ask in any situation, what does love look like here? Sometimes the answer will be patience, sometimes boundaries, rest, courage. The form may change, but the direction remains the same. There's a quiet confidence that grows from living this way. Not a certainty that everything will go according to plan, but a trust that you can meet whatever comes with openness instead of fear. A trust that love is sturdy enough to hold you even when life feels unpredictable. Over time, this posture reshapes the atmosphere around you. People feel it, conversations soften, relationships deepen. Not because you've become perfect or figured everything out, but because you've chosen to live with intention instead of autopilot. And perhaps the most beautiful part is that this choice is always available. You don't have to wait for another dramatic moment to reset your priorities. You can wake up any morning and decide again. You can begin again. Love is patient like that. It doesn't keep score of how many times you've drifted. It simply invites you back. So, moving forward isn't about proving you've recovered or demonstrating resilience in some impressive way. It's about living with a quieter kind of strength, the strength that comes from knowing what matters and letting that knowledge shape your days. And as we land this conversation, I'm reminded that life rarely gives us tidy endings. Most of the time, it simply offers quiet invitations to slow down, pay attention, to live with intention instead of just a momentum. Coming back today feels like saying yes to that invitation. Not with a big speech, just with a steady choice to keep showing up and to keep choosing love in the middle of real, everyday life. And I want to share this simply and sincerely. If this episode encouraged you or met you in a meaningful way, there are a few ways you can stay connected and support what's being built here. You can sign up for the 5-day Start Here guide on the website if you're looking for a gentle place to begin or reset. You'll also find support resources there, along with the Patreon community for those who want to help sustain this long term. If this space has blessed you in some way, one of the biggest ways you can help is by sharing the episode with someone who might need it too. Word of mouth is still one of the most powerful ways this little corner grows. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the grace and kindness you bring into the space every time you listen. It truly means more than I can neatly put into words. So until next time, take a deep breath, stay present, and keep choosing love in the ordinary moments. That's where life quietly unfolds.